I'm Julia Melville, and I'm running a series of podcasts looking at some of the different options that can support us to get beyond the thinking mind, to help relieve and release stress, anxiety and fear. I am intrigued and fascinated by the language of energy, how energy impacts our minds and our bodies, the relationship we have with that energy, where we hold energy, how we use our energy, and how we can shift our energy. With my own journey, I am continually exploring how to shift and release from the stories I was repeatedly telling myself from a young age. I am a BACP accredited psychotherapist and counsellor, and I worked for many years at a mental health charity before setting up my own private practice. 5 years ago, I completed my Kundalini Yoga Level 1 teacher training, and this practice continues to support me every day of my life. I love teaching and showing people a different way of being beyond speaking. I am also a theta healing practitioner and instructor. It's these 3 trainings that are intertwined through my work now as a mentor, supporting people to release unhelpful repetitive patterns of behaviour. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but it was recently whilst thinking about my own shifts that I decided to create a series of podcasts looking at different options, talking to inspirational people also working with well-being and healing in a variety of modalities. I really hope you enjoy the podcasts as much as I have enjoyed creating them. And in the words of John O'Donoghue, awaken to the mystery of being here and enter the quiet immensity of your own presence. Hello everyone, and as part of the series of this podcast for Thinking Beyond the Negative Mind, I am delighted to introduce to you Poppie MacLachlainn from Ensure Health. Poppie has been working as a naturopath and osteopath in Edinburgh since 2015. It's impossible for her to separate the 2 disciplines as they support each other. And without alignment in body, mind and nutrition, there can never truly be health, in her opinion. Poppie is a health facilitator. She helps people find their own health and helps them restore it. Through her body work, she reminds their body what it feels like to be healthy, and she facilitates and witnesses the body's return to health, which is really magical. And I myself have experienced this with Poppie. I had a session with her not very long ago, and it really was magical. So I'm going to hand over to you, Poppie, now, just because I'd really love to know what brought you into this work and what do you love about it, and just tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I guess my first taste of natural health, I suppose, was when I was struggling with a lot of digestive issues, which at the time I didn't realise that I was celiac. And it wasn't until I was diagnosed quite late on that a lot of the things that I'd been experiencing made sense. So digestive issues such as bloating, always, not needing to not be too far away from a bathroom, those kind of things. Not great dinner party conversations, but things that, lots of people experience nonetheless. And so having been told that it was either all in my head or I was just not quite making it up, but, relatively being dismissed, and kind of being late teens, early 20s, I discovered that there were books about things like this. So I immediately went and read a whole raft of books, literally soaking it up like a sponge. And of course, then trying every single diet known to man, woman or child that were detailed in all of these books that I kept buying and reading and borrowing from the library in those days too. And largely what I found was if I cut out some of the foodstuffs in my diet, I felt a lot better. Now, obviously being celiac, of course, if I cut wheat out, of course, I'm going to feel better. Then I was diagnosed with celiac disease, and then I went into rebellion because I grew up in a household where food allergies really were not really acknowledged. My dad was a great one for, how can your food be making you ill? Don't be so ridiculous. So it wasn't until after I was diagnosed with celiac disease that I then went into this massive rebellion. All my friends were eating pies and chips and drinking Coke, and so I wanted to be the same. I didn't want to be the only one that couldn't eat those sorts of things. So I ended up making myself really ill by eating a lot of the stuff that I really shouldn't have been eating. And then I kind of came to my senses because I put on a lot of weight, felt very uncomfortable all the time. And I went through a patch where I had cut so much out that I was basically subsisting on rice and celery. And I would only eat in the evening because any negative effect then would be gone by the time I got to morning, so I could go to work and function fully, and then have my meal of whatever it was in the evening, whatever it was that I was trying at the time. And I was looking for symptoms such as racing heart, such as sweating, such as cloudy head, not being able to think, and lots of kind of weird and wonderful symptoms that didn't really make sense in terms of any pathology, which is clearly now I understand why I was being dismissed, because there was nothing really, in inverted commas, wrong with me, that it was a functional illness rather than a structural or pathological illness. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of continued into my early 30s. And I found a diet that worked for me. My tummy was working well. My life improved immeasurably. And then, of course, I started down the wanting a family route, which one does in one's early 30s, if mm-hmm. not before. And I then found that because I've had also concomitantly, to use the medical word, had endometriosis, which is also a very difficult, very, at that stage, certainly little understood condition, which ties with the autoimmunity of celiac. I then found not only did I have this affliction that took over half my life, really, because ovulation pain and period pain were quite debilitating, again to be dismissed largely. I then decided I needed to go and have some fertility treatment, because I obviously wanted to start a family and time was running out. So I went down the track of IVF, and I did 3 rounds of IVF, and it just was not going to happen. And so my body felt terrible, my head felt terrible, I couldn't think, I'd put on weight, I felt very ugly, very unattractive, and not able to function in the world, really. And which is a common thing with people that have these kind of hormonal disturbances and hormonal treatments. And that the end result was my husband and I divorced, and we ended up being friends, but there was a big gap. And then, of course, when I met my current husband, I did get pregnant, but unfortunately I was only able to carry the baby until 17 weeks for no histological, pathological, or other that could be found at that time reason. So again, I went down the track of, well, if I'm not going to be able to have a baby to cure, in inverted commas, my endometriosis, which often it does, because of the lack of cycling of the period, it does cause a reset, kind of like the circuit breaker that everybody's been talking about recently. And if I wasn't going to be able to have that, then I was going to have to find a different way myself. And I am very much one of those people that, well, if you can't help me, or if you world can't help me, I'm going to have to help myself. So I dug my toes in, started reading again, and actually I decided that my life was not working for me. I had very high power, very high stress, very, very well paid job that meant that I was eating out 4 or 5 nights a week and not doing much home cooking. But my work-life balance was terrible. I'd get up in the morning at 5 o'clock to go to the gym. I would drink half a pot of coffee to wake myself up and get myself going. I would work all day, really pushing myself in all sorts of ways, and then get home at 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock at night, absolutely exhausted, down half a bottle of wine at least in order to relax myself, and then repeat the process the very next day.
Wow, and this sounds very challenging.
Well, and because of the types of jobs that I've always done before I became a naturopath, um, that is the kind of world that I lived in. You know, you work hard, you play hard, and it was just killing me. So I decided at that point, I think actually the universe
I was
intervened.
just going to say, isn't it amazing how these things reach a point where we just can't continue?
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking that's what had happened. So yes.
Yeah, so the universe intervened very nicely. My lovely ex-husband said to me, if if money was no object, and if you had 6 months to live, what would you do right now?
Mm.
What would you do? How would you change your life? And I said, well, if you put the 6 months to live part aside, but if money was no object, I'd go back to school and I would learn to be a naturopath. I didn't know about osteopathy really at that point. And so that's what I did. I negotiated quite a large severance package with my company that I was working for, and that I did. I signed up to naturopath school, but of course, I signed up to naturopath school and turned up to naturopath school wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase to to much to the amusement of all the what I at that point called all the hippie trippies who were sitting around in their feet shaped shoes knitting their own muesli. And so at that point, that was a huge change for me. And over the next kind of 4 or 5 years of studying and experience, apart from the fact that my mind was blown in the first week, it just changed my life completely. So by the time I came out of naturopath school, my body was much more willing to be pregnant, even though I didn't carry to term. My life was much more in balance. My life was, my body was much more aligned. My attitude was much more generous and much more loving towards both myself and other people. And I think the lessons that I learned and the friends that I made at naturopath school basically have been able to carry me through to what I now try to do for other people, which is do actually what other people did for me.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because it's like all those experiences I know you bring into your work.
Yeah, it's I think there's a part of me that is, I kind of feel a bit badly when somebody comes to me with something and I say, "Oh, I've had that, so I know firsthand," because it sounds as though I've had almost everything. But when you have an autoimmune condition, there are so many knock-on effects, both hormonally, particularly, but also physically and also mental emotionally, that all tie together. And that's one of the things that I like to think I do really well, and I like to think that people come to me for, is the ability to look at, well, yes, okay, that's your physical, but actually, have you considered that if you made a small change here or there to your nutrition or to your daily lifestyle or to your choices, that could have such a huge impact on the way that your life works right now. And I think that apart from being incredibly grateful and incredibly fortunate that I had the opportunity to do this, which not everybody does, it is so important to have a look further than just, oh, I've got a knee pain. Let's go and see somebody who can fix my knee pain.
Absolutely. And I love how you use the word such small changes can have such huge impacts, because it's so true that just a small tweak, as you say, in a diet, and particularly with your knowledge and understanding behind all of that, can actually have a really massive impact on the body physically. What areas do you find you particularly specialize in, or what areas do you find people come to you predominantly with?
I think when I was younger, when I was in my childbearing years, going towards trying to find answers about why I couldn't carry a child, I think more younger women were attracted to me and less older women. And they tended to be women that had either suffered sexual violence or trauma. And there were lots of emotional issues surrounding that. So I think people gravitated towards me that had those kind of things within their picture. More recently, as I've got older, and of course, perimenopause and menopause is quite real for me at the moment, even though I'm a bit older than a lot of women. The symptoms that we get that are really not talked about have become one of the things that I kind of try to, I suppose, I hesitate to use the word normalize because there isn't really a normal. But what I would encourage women to do is to talk to their friends, particularly, but to talk to other people and do their own research about what is happening. Because everybody talks about hot flashes and everybody talks about turning into harridan and being grumpy and being out of sorts and being emotional, which obviously are recognized hormonal imbalance type symptoms. But they don't talk about things that make your life a misery, like loss of libido or vaginal dryness or changes to your digestive system, and those kind of things that can make a huge difference. For example, when your hormones diminish, a lot of women suffer constipation in a similar way to the way that they do when their hormones are changing in pregnancy. And it's so simple to take a tablespoon of psyllium, which is kind of the texture of sawdust, in a large glass of water every single day of your life. I've been doing it for years, and it gets around things like piles, like discomfort passing the stool, like any of the other kind of associated dietary lack of fiber things that can really make you feel grumpy, bloated, toxic, and just not yourself, really. So a small change like that can have a massive impact on somebody's life. And of course, if you are cleaning house, which is what fiber does for your body, then it means that your body is able to function better, and it means that your liver can work better, your digestive system can work better, and you don't have this grotty old stuff sitting around for days that your body, because your colon's function is to reabsorb water, you won't be reabsorbing any of the toxic material, or I actually hate the word toxins, but the material that one doesn't need, which is why it's in your colon in the first place. And it's such a small thing, and anybody can do it. So yeah, it is really those small things that can make a huge difference. Sorry,
and that's okay, because I was just thinking my experience of coming to you also, and I'm suspecting this happens a lot with your patients, your clients, is that there's so much more than the treatment. So something like that would come up and you would recommend to somebody to have that supplement here, because I know that supplements can play a really important role, and there are ways that people can be on medication and the supplements can support them. And
absolutely.
And
the biggest question I suppose that I get asked, and I have actually been for a few years, is, are supplements really necessary? And the short answer is, even if plants can only suck up what's in the soil mineral wise, and so if your soil is completely depleted, even if you fertilize it with organic horse poo, if the horse ate the grass that was grown from soil that is depleted, the minerals are not getting into the soil for the plants to suck them up. Therefore, and that doesn't even take into account that it's harvested on a Monday, it goes in a cool store for 3 days, it goes onto the van on a Saturday, it arrives in the supermarket on the following Monday, so already we're a week late. Then it sits in you go to the supermarket and buy it, that's another day, and then it sits in your fridge for another 3 or 4 days before you eat it. So a lot of those nutrients will have started to degrade by 10 days after it's been picked. So I think, unfortunately, while I'm not a fan of just throwing supplements left, right and centre, at people, I do think that there is a good case for people to be taking supplements now. And because so many of us are medicated for so many things, that obviously affects how we absorb things. So again, there's a good argument for supplementation. For example, so many of us take antacids in one form or another, and that then reduces your acid environment in your stomach, which then reduces your ability to both absorb B12 but also to produce intrinsic factor, which can only be produced in an acid environment, which enables you to absorb the small amount of B12 from your food that you will be absorbing. So, and again, it's not as simple as just simply taking a B12 supplement under your tongue, or because the amount that you're absorbing and the way that you absorb it, it has to be under certain conditions. So, there are nutrients that need to go with your B12 in order to enhance your absorption. And things like, we were talking last time we had a chat, we were talking about antidepressants. And so many people are being prescribed antidepressants at the moment, and so they're often told that they shouldn't be taking some of the supplements that would normally treat depression or anxiety. And while there are definite interactions between some herbal remedies, some supplements, and some medication, and it's always wise to check, there are lots of supplements that can support the use of medication, whether it's antidepressants or whether it is antacid, or whether it's diabetes medication, whether it's insulin or metformin. There are plenty of ways to support your body. And again, I can remember one person very, very early on in my practice. She came to me and I really wasn't sure what to do with her. She had the smell of somebody whose kidneys were struggling. She had this complete exhaustion, lack of energy, etc. And I said to her, have you thought about taking a multivitamin? And she said, well, no. And I was terrified because I wasn't really sure what was going on, and I didn't want to recommend something that was going to make her worse. And, kidneys are quite delicate things, especially if they're tied up with diabetes. And so I suggested to her to take a multivitamin and come back and see me in 6 weeks. So I was postponing the inevitable for me, because that would give me 6 weeks breathing space to do a bit more research. And she came back 6 weeks later, and all she'd been doing was taking that multivitamin, and she gave me the biggest hug and she said, Poppy, you have saved my life.
Wow.
So, and I'm not telling you that because that makes me amazing, but just to illustrate and demonstrate how a small change,
a small tweak can actually have such a massive impact. Yeah. And I want to ask you, because I know when I was introducing you, I brought in about the osteopathy as well. So do you want to say a little bit about the osteopathy? Oh, I can't say the word, osteopathy.
Sure. So one of the things that I found, particularly with the fertility issues, was, and particularly with endometriosis, but also with things like PCOS, things like perimenopausal brain myself now. I'll come back to that one. All of those kind of pelvic congestion type conditions, they can't be cured, and I would be very foolish if I claimed to cure anything. But what I do tend to do is use visceral osteopathy, which is basically working with the guts, basically, in most of those cases. Because if you think about it, if your spine is not functioning well, it means that the nerves can't function well. It means that the muscles can't function well. It means that the lymphatics can't function well. And so what you end up with is nervous tissue that is not able to conduct the messages, to muscles that are not able to move because they are either congested or they're not getting sufficient blood supply, to organs that are not able to function well because the nerve message, brain, spine, gut isn't working, or is not getting there. And so you've got this whole kind of congestion. And I know that naturopaths always bang on about liver, but from an osteopath point of view, if you're looking at the structure, because structure definitely governs function, and equally function governs structure. So if your guts are upset, chances are you'll have a lower back problem. If you have a lower back problem, chances are you'll have a lesser function in your gut, your digestive system, or your reproductive system, depending on what's wrong with your back. Now, osteopaths for years have been looking at not whether your back is straight or not, because anybody can have a straight back, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee good nerve function or good fluid exchange. But what we look at is the function of your body and whether that fluid is being exchanged well. So again, down to the small things. If you do deep breathing, and I hesitate to say exercises, but if you place your left hand just above your pubic bone and your right hand just where your ribs split, and try and breathe sufficiently deep to move that left hand above your pubic bone, and there are obviously anatomical and physiological processes that will say that will contradict what I'm about to say, but largely, with those few exceptions, it's almost physically impossible for your sympathetic nervous system, which governs fight, flight, freeze, to operate at the same time as your resting, digesting, repairing nervous system, because you can't run away from the toothy monster and have good digestion. You can't do your deep breathing and repairing while you are running away from the toothy monster. So our bodies were designed so that the function of the parts of our nervous system they're not mutually exclusive, because there are many cases where they do have to work together. But largely, it's not physiologically possible to be in a state of high stress, high anxiety at the same time as be doing deep breathing. So once you've perfected the art lying down of that deep breathing, you can do it anywhere. You can do it standing at the sink doing the dishes. You can do it in the supermarket checkout queue. You can do it at the office. It doesn't need a massive amount of practice before you get into that. And that is one of the things that can bring you from a level 150 anxiety down to a 90 or a 95. And that just may be enough to take the edge off, to allow you to function or to get back into your groove, that will then allow your body just a little bit of breathing space, sorry for the no pun intended, to get you back to functioning much better.
Absolutely, I agree totally. I mean, breathing is something I talk about a lot because of Kundalini yoga, and of course breath work is massive in there. So I couldn't agree with you more. When I discovered breathing properly, it transformed my life.
But it's also going back to the osteopathy, the lymphatic pump, which is part of your waste disposal system. If your diaphragm, and which is the kind of top of the box, and your pelvic floor muscles, which are the bottom of the box, your posterior abdominal wall, which is all your back and muscles of your back, and your abdomen muscles, which are the four kind of sides of the box, if they are not working well, every time you breathe goes up, every time your diaphragm goes up and down, increase of pressure, relaxation of pressure, that's basically what moves your lymphatics along. So if you're not breathing correctly, physiologically, you're not getting rid of your waste in the most optimum manner. So therefore, again, it can sit around, it can not quite fester, but it can sit around, and you won't be functioning, you won't be feeling great, and you won't be functioning optimally.
So which is where the two sort of marry together so beautifully.
Absolutely. And most osteopaths are known for backs and necks. And yes, of course, I work with backs and necks, but mainly for for all of the reasons that I've just talked about. And I tend to try and stabilize somebody's back and neck, or the bit that they've come in with, and then talk to them about what the possibilities are, because I'm not the kind of osteopath where you come in, I whack you, crack you, get you straight, and then send you out the door. If that's the kind of practitioner that you want, that's not me at all. But I also acknowledge that sometimes, it isn't the right time for somebody to be addressing everything all at one go. So I think, and that's where I try and say, let's take it a step at a time, because yes, we need to get you functioning well. Yes, we need to give you the nutrients to enable that functioning to happen. But also we need to look at the other things that are happening. If you're desperately unhappy in your job or your marriage, or if you have family members undergoing chemotherapy or any other serious illness, there's so many emotional components to an illness that without addressing that, at least in some way, you just won't get to the root of the problem. And one of the beautiful things about osteopathy, certainly the way that I practice it, is the ability to release some of that emotional stuff from the body, which then allows the body to function better. So then it becomes that virtuous cycle rather than the downward spiral that everybody seems to be in. And once you are able to release some of that from your body, and again, it's amazing how the small things, the small changes, can have such a huge impact on both movement, enjoyment of life, pain reduction. Yeah, it's... Can you tell I love my job?
I can. And when you were talking about it just then, I could sort of visualize like sort of undamming something, or like sort of pulling a plug on something, and it's like, and then it clears and goes through.
And that is almost exactly what happens. And at the same time as kind of undamming something and letting the blood flow into the body, what we're also doing is not looking for the disease. Anybody can find a disease. One of Dr. Still, who was the founder of osteopathy, one of his sayings was, any fool can find disease. What you need to find is the health. So we're looking for the healthy tissue. We're looking for your body's remembrance or memory of health, and take that and try and spread that through the rest of the body rather than focusing on the disease. So osteopathy is an amazing discipline, and it's multifaceted. We are, in effect, I think it was Rumi who said, at the top of the breath before you go into the out breath, that space, that silence, that gap is where the magic happens. And that's what I'm looking for as an osteopath, is that stillness within which the most profound change happens. And so I suppose I try to be the fulcrum for that change to happen, at the same time as being the witness and the facilitator, because the body has to pick up and run with what it's offered. And the best way to do that is through memory of health.
Absolutely. And that feels like a really perfect place just to draw this to an end, really, and just finish on that positive note, because I love that. And I love that Rumi quote with the little place of stillness, because it's so true. Yeah. So Poppy, if people want to find you, and I'm sure plenty of people will want to find you after hearing that incredibly passionate and informative description of how you work, how can they find you? Where will they find you?
I have a website. You can find it at www.ensure-health.com. And on there it explains various bits of information about how I work. You can contact me by phone, although I have to be honest, if text or email is better. My phone number is 07437 835 065. So I'm happy to receive text messages. And my email address is osteopathpoppy@gmail.com. And the only reason I say text and email is easier is because if I'm with somebody, I can't obviously break off to answer the telephone. And the other thing is, because I'm quite busy, if I don't get back to you immediately, it's not because I don't love it, it's because I'm just busy.
And just to clarify, Ensure Health is ENSURE and Poppie is POPPIE.
That's correct.
Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, it's great. I will also put links onto the podcast for people so that you can find Poppie if you would like to find her. But I cannot thank you enough, Poppie, today for joining me. It's been absolutely magical to have you here. And I feel I've learned so much as well. It's been absolutely wonderful. So thank you very, very much indeed.
You're most welcome, anytime.
Thank you.
What a wonderful and insightful talk from Poppie, and I would like to thank Poppie MacLachlainn so much for joining me on this podcast. Just wonderful to hear about the mind-body-soul connection, which is just so important, and also so very relevant with these podcasts, thinking beyond the negative mind, because so often we are ill, we have recurring ailments and things like that, and we often, we keep going to the doctor and nothing seems to change. And I just love the way Poppie works, in that she can do something like the cranial osteopathy or with the supplements that can actually really shift something. So if anything resonated with you, or maybe you have a recurring pain, have a feel into it and have a think and see if there is an alternative perspective to look at it. And I would really encourage you to do that. Certainly through, actually it was through my Kundalini yoga training really that I first started to understand the energy of the body and the language that it speaks to us. And it really is magical. So thank you so much again for listening.